Data communism, you mean? That's what you're arguing for. It's like, get a book that covers the period between 1917 and 1991 and see the effects, you know? This really well documented, that shit.
Is that Joey J?
That was also, you know, globalists say about eating, you know, eating.
He looks a bit like
And the policies they make, they don't say it directly, but indirectly, what they mean, we have to get rid of some people. Or like, most of the people live miserably.
Yeah, basically we need a cult.
Yeah.
Which is classic modernist thinking.
Yeah, the solution.
Which modernism being the root of not just communism, but also capitalism as well. I'm not here to advocate communism. People shouldn't believe in isms. Right? Isms are bad. Name an ism that's good and I'll be surprised. Sexism, it's not good. Fascism, that's not good. I can't think of a good ism.
Optimism.
Ah. I think it's that, but none of you that I share, obviously. I mean, you've met me, but you know, but yeah. Yeah, okay, I'll give you feminism, yeah. Yeah, maybe it's not a global thing, but a lot of political isms aren't good then, alright?
Yeah. The thing was,
Did you do the module review, Jem?
yes.
Outstanding work. Have you selected all your modules for next year?
Oh, mine's next year.
What did you pick?
I feel it breathing down my neck. I didn't want to be shouting that much at home.
Good. And you got on it?
I think so.
Why not?
I was agro and production management. So they sort of doing that course and I got like the pre-roll. And they had that in, so I guess I got on it.
Yeah, if you didn't spit it back saying you couldn't pick it, then you got on.
Yeah. And then film and television, fashion marketing, branding.
No dissertation.
I'm going to be honest, I think my time management skills will be that.
You know.
Yeah, I just don't think I could do it. I'm doing it too last minute.
That's really does sense.
Mom, say no. I said maybe. Aim, am I gonna die? Last time I did full volume. I couldn't sit for 2 days. I think I'm gonna get a gym.
Which is great.
Next
Also,
year.
Like next academic year. Yeah, but if you're
Yeah, that's good.
No, because I'll do like after
We don't pick George yet, Jem.
No. Are we
Think
getting
good idea.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do the game one.
Great.
No.
Oh.
Did you about bring free friends Friday?
Maybe. I'm considering it.
Everyone
Who else?
knows.
Pick for next year?
Adam, you suggested gyms when we went on the social media. I go, I said I can go like I'm a gym goer, but the gym is open 24 hours. So
Which one, JD?
no, the
Yeah,
gym
there's
by,
one.
you know where Flamingos is? I did once. No, there was a period when I was going, and then I started working. That was it was just taking out my life. And I used it as an excuse. The gym's better because you can go whenever you want. And if I want to go with my friends, they all go at stupid times. So there used to be like a really small like private gym.
Oh yeah. Of course,
I don't like really busy gyms. And it was also a 24-hour thing. You mostly just checked in and checked yourself out. Like you always have some twatted really tight shorts.
You could fill up the whole year.
Sort my form out and like go away.
The whole people do it is like focus exactly on.
Yeah, it's one thing to ask for help with that shit. It's another. Yeah, if you come up to me and you ask for help, I respect you. Don't come up to me because you think I need help. I don't know.
You haven't done your module selections yet. We'll be doing this. You've done yours.
Yep.
I've seen yours.
Yep.
Depressed the shit out.
Mine's are quite a lot more depressing, I think, next year.
Is that?
Yeah.
Why?
My English modules are very depressing.
Oh, because you joined honours, isn't it?
Yeah.
What one are you doing a dissertation in?
Media.
Okay, and what's the other one?
Gender.
Two in semester 1, one in semester 2.
Yeah.
I've seen yours.
The shit out
Huh?
of you with mine does.
Oh, she depresses the shit out of me anyway. But a pair of you do. You come to the office and fuck you that work on.
It's like reverse therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, as in I feel worse when it's just, yeah. Exactly like
But we
reverse
feel
therapy.
better.
Yeah.
Offloading all our problems and then
Yeah,
you've got to
thanks,
deal with
guys.
it all.
I am not a therapist. I'm going to get a poster that says I am not a therapist and put it up on my door. Voice chosen?
Not yet. No, I had a look through it briefly, but
Get on it.
yeah, I need to. When's the deadline for it?
Well, May,
But
but
fill up though.
Oh yeah, they do.
something
Yeah,
fill up.
yeah, I couldn't choose what not to do this year, so
So,
I'll get that this
crack
weekend.
on. Yeah, it's worth it.
What would you recommend? You're doing a gaming one.
Play games?
What is, yeah, what does that consist of?
That's not bad. That's fair for you.
I only played FIFA out of college, so
It's weirdly, I had somebody this year who did FIFA for one assessment and COD for the other.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I'll do
So,
that.
well, one guy's not really barrier.
What does that consist of
I
then?
did
For like
I
assignments?
always love
No,
Assignment
Me too.
1,
I don't think you
like this module, you do video.
Right.
It has to be a video for a game. Let's play video.
Oh, okay.
So you pick a video, you pick a game, you do a playthrough.
So you've got to get a capture card and stuff.
I'm not seeing this morning, so bad.
It shouldn't have to be. And so, you know, I'll have by September, I'll have PlayStation 5s and Xbox Series X lined up.
Finance, I'm not gonna lie.
I've got 2 on the way. We're going to the lab downstairs, yeah, next week.
I like that.
Well,
like 9 or something. Yeah.
More importantly, you can use them to do assignments.
Oh yeah, no,
You know, so, so yeah, and with the switches as well, you can do the same thing. So, it doesn't miss, if you're not playing at the moment, you're just stuck. It's not there yet. To make a let's play video, you sort of play the game, contextualise what you're doing via some of the materials in the module. And then part 2 is an essay. Review essay, take a video game. You can't do the same game as you did in the first one. But
Take the PR
those you take the academic themes that we cover and
Right.
review the games and the theme.
Oh, okay.
It's not like giving you like 4 stars or anything like that. It's
They're not
like,
writing a
it's
review.
giving, so like loads of people do Grand Theft Auto last year. How would you analyse it? It's violent.
You talk about how people like
I did
say it's linked with like violence.
Absolutely. And then you can reflect on that whole video game violence debate.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's got particular representations of women, so you can reflect on that debate, and then a particular subject position and
There's a
what
lot
it's
you can write
asking you
about.
to do. Yes.
Yeah, I might.
So that's what, and like just like this module, the whole module is giving you all the themes that you need.
And then you can find which ones are relevant to your essays.
I don't know.
Okay, so let's plow through this shit and get out of here. Because I'm finishing at 4:30 and I'm not coming back for a week and a half. When you're ready, ladies. Done? Bloody hell. Somebody's put 50p in the meat data today. So, what is the result? She's seen the iceberg, she's gone. What is the result of algorithmic governance, you may ask?
Inverse relationship of power.
Very good. Inverse relationship of power, or as we call it, asymmetric.
Yeah.
According to Eli Kreizer's book from 2011, The Filter Bubble, the product of algorithmic governance is that basically we are optimized. Algorithms work in order to give us a particular view of the world which is optimal for us as consumers. So, be that consumers of information online or consumers of commercial products, it doesn't actually matter that much how you break down that idea of being a consumer here. Consumers of content or consumers of products, it works in the same way. We are presented a particular view of the world which we are happy with. Why would you want to be happy? Well, let me redress that. It doesn't mean happy as in smiling. We're presented a view of the world which we are comfortable with, ostensibly. Now, why would you do that?
To avoid being depressed.
Fuck that. As we've learned in the module, being depressed is actually a very important motivational tactic of social networks.
Consume.
Yes, but why? The result of it is to consume. But the real net effect here is that it keeps you locked in to the network. If you're continually presented with a consistent worldview that agrees with your opinions, you're not likely to switch to the off button. If you're given constantly stuff which, you disagree with, you find hard to accept, you find hard to deal with, you're not going to engage. It's not the sweet spot that they want you to be in. It's like, this is why kids watch Disney movies. They like them. That's why Disney churns out this shit over and over and over again. Disney understands. You produce the same crap over and over again. You've got consistent consumers. So this is why the Marvel Cinematic Universe exists.
Is it like with the psychology that we don't want to hear the uncomfortable truth? So we
Absolutely. Totally.
We don't want to confront.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear that Marvel films are complete shit. Alright? Nobody wants to hear that because everyone wants to go and see the big shiny things flying about the screen and fucking buffed white Americans saving the world again, because we've never seen that before. That's not a consistent fucking story, is it? Nobody wants to hear the truth about that. That's why when I do that lecture to the first years, which is why you guys didn't even have that lecture. You had Chris talking about something instead. My lecture on sort of the fucking Frankfurt School is to tell you that you're all fucking morons, because you just chew up this shit, which gives you ideological messages which are so fucking wrong that it's untrue. But we like that stuff. At root level, we like that stuff. That's the stuff we keep coming back to. Now, algorithms continually sort and order data to keep us in that position where we are given things that we like. A lot of you have actually analysed this idea in your projects, particularly if you're looking at Instagram content. The Instagram algorithms work constantly to give you this stuff. It's not what you want. Hey, that would be a mistake to think of it like that. It's giving you stuff that will keep you hooked. It's not about what you want, certainly not about what you need. Those are very different concepts. It is about what will keep you there. Eli Parisa calls that effect the filter bubble. Basically, we get trapped by algorithms in this big bubble of feeling nice and warm. And we are not likely to look outside it. So filter bubble is a state of intellectual isolation. We are kept out of thinking about other things, and instead are kept in a position of intellectual stasis. So social media algorithms select what information a user sees based on information about them that they've accumulated and scraped from their previous usage. Users become separated from information that disagrees with their viewpoint. Parisa asks one simple question: what is the effect of that for democracy? We live in a democratic society in this country. There are many democratic societies around the world. Democracy in the last 15 years has been in a perpetual crisis. We have seen wild veers to the right. At some point in the near future, we're going to see wild veers the other way, to the left. Neither are actually desirable for any kind of democratic society. We actually, in the history of democratic societies, we look at when they function best, it is when they sit in the centre. That is when things have actually been done. Progress has been made. Unfortunately, at the moment, we are way over that way. we will come back that way. That's not necessarily a good thing either. The rebalance there is not going to work well. So, the filter bubble is a defining characteristic of social media culture itself. The idea that we get trapped in a particular way of seeing the world. This is probably the easiest thing to apply in terms of an analysis in assignment 2, which is a real shame for all those people who aren't here today, because they would have found that out. And it's like, you thought that this was going to be a worthless lecture, but I've just given you the biggest bit of ammunition you can use, because it doesn't really matter what you've looked at in assignment 1, you have encountered some evidence of being in a filter bubble, just by virtue of doing it. Now, the bubble effect has very negative implications for civic discourse. For example, user exposure to fake news and echo chambers is related to this effect. People will often ask questions about fake news. How can people not see fake news, and why do they listen to it? So you're kind of missing the point. How do people see it? It's pushed to them. How can they not see the effect? Because the fake news sits with all the other information that they have. It has context. It may well not be true, but it will appear true in the context of all the other stuff that they are given. You become unquestioning because it agrees with the other things that you are given over time. Therefore, it becomes reasonable to you. It's easy for us, actually, if you did a module on fake news, right, and somebody puts up a thing, is this story true or false? You'll probably spot it straight away. If you were given 10,000 items, and it sat somewhere in the middle, and they're all broadly saying the same thing, it becomes a hell of a lot harder to spot the fake thing. There may well be many other fake things in that 10,000 items as well, but it becomes a lot more difficult to actually discern what is fake and what is real when it fits consistently with the information that you are provided. And not just the information you provided, but the filter bubble doesn't just work for data and information, it works for who you connect with. If everyone on your network is saying the same kinds of things and sharing the same kind of information, again, it becomes doubly hard to spot the fake stuff if it's consistent with that worldview. People, will ask a legitimate question. You'll know what, if I say QAnon, do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. There's conspiracy theory in the US, QAnon?
Yeah.
Kind of? Do you want to explain, Will? Because I bet you know.
Well, it's a very weird concept to try and explain, but the long story short of it is there's a series of what they call drops on 4chan by this anonymous user. I mean, most users on 4chan are anonymous by the name, but that claims to be some sort of spy working to try and help Donald Trump fight the deep state and keep him from being removed from power and all
Can I
this
just say,
weird
before
shit.
Will goes on, this is absolutely true.
It sounds insane, but it's all word for word true. But the drops are never literal. They're always things that are weird and enigmatic and mysterious, and so people come up with their own ideas of what the drops mean, and try and sit and wait for their sort of ideas and predictions to see if they come true.
I think that's a fairly good explanation. So QAnon is this kind of weirdly vast conspiracy theory which has operated in American politics for pretty much the last 7 years. The QAnon, we can relate it to particular concrete examples. So the most famous example on QAnon that emerged out of a QAnon drop was this, that Hillary Clinton was involved in a paedophile ring that was running out of a pizzeria in New Jersey. The pizzeria existed, it was an actual building, and people who believed in this conspiracy theory went to that pizza parlour and tried to burn it down and break it into it and all this sort of shit, right?
A dude went in with a gun and tried to quote
Shoot
find the children.
Basically.
He went in to try and save the children.
That's right, yeah. Literally after reading this, it was I'm going in to save all these kids who have been trafficked into this pizza parlour, which apparently had something to do with Hillary. Well, not apparently. The conspiracy was that Clinton was basically there right, as part of this paedophile ring running out of the basement of a pizzeria in suburban New Jersey. This is one of the most fucked up things I've ever heard in my life, and unsurprisingly completely untrue. When said gunman went to the pizzeria, he found, unsurprisingly, people making pizzas. That's what happened there. He did not find children locked up in a basement, and he was swiftly arrested by New Jersey state troopers, and I believe he's serving a very long sentence now, which is probably for the best of society at that point as well. QAnon is a classic, wonderful example of the filter effect. This is a group of people who have come together basically out of serious distrust of Hillary Clinton as a politician, a serious buy-in to the vision of the world given by Donald Trump. So at this point, you should realise these are not well-adjusted individuals to begin with, right? Anyone who takes Donald Trump's worldview seriously has got fucked up problems. And this is the extreme fringe. One aspect of QAnon is actually that Donald Trump has been sent by God, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, that he is like not quite the second coming, but he is a God-sent agent to deliver sort of peace on earth.
They believe that JFK Jr. would come back from the dead or
so,
something
you know,
as well.
They missed out the whole thing about paying off porn stars. I don't know how they missed that. But, so, how did one thing that we need to understand is how did QAnon develop? QAnon really develops when, and this is from Bill Gates himself, who's partially at least one of the people responsible for this kind of technological system. Technology such as social media lets you go off with like-minded people so you're not mixing and sharing and understanding other points of view. So the QAnon conspiracy emerges from a group of extremely like-minded people who are given information, agree with it, amplify it, discuss it and come to more conclusions about it, give rationale to it through those discussions, and then eventually believe it. And what happens? Some idiot goes into a pizzeria in New Jersey with a semi-automatic rifle, expecting to find a paedophile ring, and literally expecting Hillary Clinton to be there. You know, leading this paedophile ring. Some people are still looking at me like, what? And like, no, check it out. This happened, okay? No. This is, I'm not making this up, alright? This happened. This is what we would call a classic filter bubble. Now, it's a very extreme version of filter bubble, but it does show the power of what a filter bubble can do. On a much lesser extent to that, filter bubbles, we exist in them each and every day. Nick, you're a big K-pop fan, right? Yeah. So online, Nick, you're going to be interacting with other K-pop fans, developing content, but also consuming content, you know, discussing who's good, who's not so good, etc., right? That's basically what Gates is saying. Now, it's a much more benign version. I'm not saying these guys are evil and are going to kill people. Maybe. But it's... that kind of fandom is essentially a filter bubble. You know, political leanings are filter bubbles. What football team you support is a filter bubble. Filter bubbles operate all over social media. We are part of many of them ourselves. The stuff I get given on social media effectively creates a filter bubble. What's the matter?
I'm thinking about Henry Jenkins. What do you mean it's just a fan culture?
Yeah. QAnon is just a fan culture. That fucking Anders Breivik guy in Norway, that's just a fan culture. You know, yeah. This is why Jenkins is really dangerous. So, one of the responses that we can have to these very dangerous filter bubbles which operate in society, and which have created major problems in democratic societies, there is no question about that, is having alternative social media. And this is where the link to the dark web comes. What we have at the moment is a centralized social media system. Social media is developed around major companies who control data and flows of data within those systems. What we could have instead is a decentralized system where there is no company in control. where instead you have a distributed network where different nodes interact with one another. Instead of having one big Facebook, you have several thousand Facebooks. Information can flow in and out, but ostensibly they are not controlled by one. And therefore the flow of data is not controlled by a singular set of algorithmic governance principles owned by the same company, which removes much of the possibility of filter bubbles existing in the first place, because it is the algorithmic governance which creates the conditions for filter bubbles in the first place. You break the centrality of it, you break the algorithmic governance. So, when Musk took over Twitter last year, what did a lot of Twitter users do instantly?
Tweet to complain.
Well, they did tweet to complain, but then they did something practical.
Left Twitter.
To do what? A lot of people left Twitter to go where? Does anyone know where?
Twitter, the other Twitter.
That other shit thing. That is true, yeah, but it had a name, that other shit thing.
Wasn't it Mastodon?
Who said that?
Me.
Yeah. A lot of Twitter users left to go to a service called Mastodon. Mastodon is a decentralized alternative to Twitter. You sign up to a server on Mastodon. There are many different servers that exist. You sit on that server, but that data from that server is not distributed to other servers, nor is it distributed outside of the server. You can still be found, you have a URL, but in that it will be like @mastodon and then the server name .org. So instead of having like just a Twitter handle, you have a Mastodon handle which is actually decentralized. It is put on a server which exists on Mastodon, but it is not put on Mastodon itself. So Mastodon as a company has no control over the individual servers. There is no algorithmic governance because they can't run algorithmic governance because they don't control the servers themselves. This is basically just an umbrella organization for a whole bunch of decentralized communications. You can communicate between different people on different servers, that's no problem. There's no barrier to doing that. But what they do is break the idea that there is a single company in charge of that service by decentralizing the service itself. That's what we mean by decentralized social media. And it takes the principle from the dark web that you are locked into one way of doing things. And by decentralization, you are distributing identity and data in all sorts of ways so it becomes impossible to govern in that way. You can't algorithmically govern Mastodon because you can't do it across those different servers. And those different servers have different principles of how they release information. So that puts control of the network in what we call the nodes of the network. In this, we have what we call classically a hub and spoke model. There is a hub and everyone comes off of it as a spoke. That is a centralized control system. This puts all the power at the nodes of the network. There is no middle. There's no core to Mastodon. There's no middle thing that sits there. Mastodon as a company doesn't have a middle where everything sprouts out from. It doesn't work that way. Everything is distributed. That is weirdly exactly how the internet was envisaged. When it was set up in the 1960s, it was set up purposely to be a system that would survive a nuclear confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the reason why it would have survived is there was no central core to the system. You could take out big communications networks in America, big communication centers, fine. The internet will still exist because it's just a point-to-point system. If it went down, if one point went down, the links between all the other points would still exist. It just reforms around it. Weirdly, it's about going back to the original vision of what the internet was supposed to be before these big companies came in and plonked themselves in the middle of everything and became these vast sort of central hubs for information. So, there has been a history of trying to do this. The first social network that operated on a decentralized principle was called Diaspora. Diaspora launched in 2009. I was one of the very first users of Diaspora when it launched. It was envisaged as what was called a socialist response to social media culture and structure. If social media is highly capitalistic, where a certain group of people, an epistocracy, get rich off how it works, then diaspora was seen as socialist. The wealth of the network is distributed across the users and those who use the service rather than the people who own it. So it was a non-profit platform, non-commercial. And it's not impossible to do this and be successful. Wikipedia follows that model. We all use Wikipedia. Wikipedia isn't owned by anyone. Wikipedia is a free service distributed amongst users, which generates a huge amount of traffic every day. So it is there, and it's advertising free, obviously, free access. You know, you can donate to it, and lots of people do donate to it, fortunately, because if they didn't, there wouldn't be a Wikipedia. But it shows that there is some success in doing this kind of model. Now, the most well-known social media site is Diaspora, which tries to develop an open source alternative, and it was seen as an open source alternative to Facebook. Once people started to realise around 2008 that Facebook was structurally a really bad idea, Diaspora was developed in contrast to Facebook. Not one company holding everyone's information, but thousands of different interlinked servers. Not one of them having a critical mass alone to be able to exercise that kind of control. So it was created by some university students from NYU, privacy aware, personally controlled, do it all open source social network. Open source meant the code was available to anyone. That wasn't even proprietary. There were no algorithms that you couldn't know about because it was all out in the open. Not funded by advertising, but by donations. So no advertisers, no need to collect data in order to pay your customers because there were no customers like that. They described Facebook as spying for free. And basically their model was to get rid of that. Now each user on Diaspora was effectively a server. You created your own Diaspora account and then you set what could be shared. You were given really fine-grained data points which you could say, yeah, I'll share that, but I won't share that. So you were put in control of what data went out of it. How many of you have heard of Diaspora before I just started talking about it? Okay, so what was the problem? Does it sound good?
Sounds good, but the hate speech probably, I don't know.
It wasn't even hate speech. It wasn't even so much that. Does anyone know why it didn't work?
No money?
No, not really. It's really simple. It wasn't as easy to use. That's it. The user experience was a little bit more complicated than Facebook. Plus, Facebook had already become a massive, massive company which could extend itself through advertising and control of particular functions on the online. You couldn't replace those on Diaspora. You know, keeping in touch with all your friends. Well, that would have meant all your friends had to go to Diaspora as well. When a few don't even know about it, well, that's not going to happen. It wasn't public enough in that people didn't know about it. And there were just small barriers to usage, which is enough to put people off. How do you sign up for a Facebook account? You give them an email address, you set up a password, bang, you're pretty much away. I mean, you can do all the rest. You can make it as sophisticated or as not sophisticated as you want. Put up a photo of yourself, give it all your information. I'm a male, I'm this tall, I'm this weight, my eye colour is this. This is all this shit, right? Really easy user experience to set something up on Facebook or Instagram. Diaspora, not so much. People got confused by the idea, wait, I'm a node? The fuck does that mean? I don't want to be a node. That sounds bad. That sounds like something to do with cancer or something. I don't want to be a node. No, I want to be... No, it's the whole thing. There are barriers to doing this kind of thing. It still relies on a kind of technological expertise, which is not great. It didn't play well in America, the idea of being a socialist social network as well, where the word, I mean, Abby, you can confirm this, right? The word socialist is kind of terrible. terrible, right? You know, you describe someone as socialist and it means not great. So there was a kind of radically socialist privacy thing going on here with diaspora, what they were trying to achieve. It's like that we're trying to protect people from corporate domination and having to sacrifice themselves to corporate purposes in order to share. So you stop people from being exploited by capitalistic influence, hence being a reasonably socialist project. But that doesn't necessarily play very well. Diaspora was inspired by something called .communism. A book that came out in 2003, .communism. The .communist manifesto is Evan Morgan's manifesto in 2003. It said that the important political goal and possibility today is the liberation of information from the control of ownership with the help of networks that are based on association among peers without hierarchical control, which replaces the coercive system of capitalist ownership of knowledge and data. Communism was basically a direct challenge to the whole notion of epistocracy. The idea that particular knowledge could be held and that became incredibly valuable. By making everything freely available, you remove epistocracy. You remove the control of a particular group of people who have power based through their knowledge alone, and who lock that knowledge down in order for other people not to be able to access it. And diaspora, if you like, is an attempt to take those ideas and take on social media with it. The reason why diaspora failed more than anything is they underestimated their opponent. Already by the time it launched, Facebook was this juggernaut. Huge. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of users. Didn't hit billion users for a little while afterwards, but already the critical mass of what they were trying to do was too big. If they'd started it 2004, when Zuckerberg started Facebook, they were in with a shot there. But 2009 was way too late. Nobody was getting off that network at that point in time. Especially to go to something which they didn't even know how it was going to work. At least with Facebook, you knew how it was work. I sign up, I add people, bang, I'm done, I'm happy. You know, this one, he's like, I've got to be a node? What the fuck does that mean? How do I connect to other people if I'm a node? How do I do that? Too many questions, sounded too difficult. Elo was an advertising-free alternative to Facebook and Twitter. Their principles: never sell user data to advertisers to third parties, never show adverts, and not enforce a real name policy. Now that last one is interesting. Don't enforce a real name policy. Why might it be good for you not to use your real name on social media?
Job search.
What does that mean?
Well, some people can't see your personal life address. When they go and check it to employees, they can't find you by your name.
And why would you want to do that?
I don't know, some people are dodgy.
Like you. What have you done and put online which is going to stop you getting a job?
All my social
Ange?
media's got my name on it, so.
Okay.
Privacy, like even like thieves. Like I remember when I was in the primary school and the teacher, like the librarian, did this lecture, you know, about Facebook, and I didn't. I was so young, and she was like, "You idiots! You post pictures, and they know what you're doing all the time."
I guess there's the privacy element to it. But is there a practical reason why somebody wouldn't want their name? They want to use social media to contact people, but they wouldn't want to use their actual name. A practical reason for that. Okay, let me give you a practical reason for it. Let's say you're a person who's been in a physically abusive relationship. And as part of that, you have decided to use a different name on social media so the person who was physically abusive to you cannot find you on social media and continue that cycle of abuse. Does that sound reasonable? In effect, Facebook doesn't allow you to do that. They operate a real name policy. So, survivors of domestic abuse actually find it very difficult to use services like Facebook because they have to reveal their actual identity. If you try and put a different name on your Facebook account, see what happens. They will hound you to change your name back to the original. They will allow you to do variations of it. And obviously they know if you've got married, because the first thing somebody who gets married does is put fucking pictures on Facebook, right? So they understand that bit. But if you actually try to change your identity fundamentally from what it was when you signed up to something new, they will hound you to put it back as it was. The reason being, you're fucking with their algorithms. You're making it harder to make you into something to be sold if you keep on changing your name, or even if you change it once. That static identity is really important. So enforcing a real name policy can be a real problem for people. Let me give you another example of it. Let's say I'm not me. I'm Paul Smith. Okay? Say hello, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Thank you. Now, partway through my life, I decide I'm not happy as Paul Smith. I actually want to become Paula Smith. And I transition from being male to female. Is there anything wrong with that? That is a question for you to have your own fucking answer to. I'm not interested in people's answer to that question. That is a personal view. I personally think people should be allowed to do that. Facebook doesn't. Facebook will push against transgender people changing their identity because it fucks with their algorithms. This is not good. The real name policy of social networks is there to enforce consistency because that is important to them in terms of their business model. What Ella was saying was, actually, you need to let people be fluid in this because there are a huge number of, I've just tapped onto 2 here, but there are a huge number of circumstances where people may not want to use their real name. And that's fine. So, in 2014, huge numbers of people from the LGBTQIA community in San Francisco made a big public statement about leaving Facebook and signing up for Ello. Not because they thought Ello was brilliant, wonderful, but because Ello allowed people to express alternative identities freely. It was an absolute protest of the real name policy at the time. That you can allow flexibility for people's identity to be expressed in a number of different ways. Why didn't Ello work? What was the problem with it?
They don't make money.
Exactly. It didn't make any money. By radically going against the money-making principles of social media, it meant it had money. The system used to fall over all the time. There weren't even that many people on it. It simply didn't have enough server space in order to maintain any numbers. It became clunky and slow to use. And guess what? People don't like clunky and slow. And they left. Very, very straightforward. They left. It didn't work. Minds, a very, very similar kind of principle here, an open source and distributed social network using blockchain protocols, which actually rewarded users for participation. So flipping that model that I've talked about of like, we are free labor on social media, it flipped it. It used blockchain principles to assess how much you used the network and what you did on it, and rewarded you accordingly in cryptocurrency for how you were using the network. It put the data selling angle back on you. It gave you your cut, basically. And then users could, use those tokens to purchase other things on the network or to take them outside as well. Unfortunately for Minds, it promoted 2 other really important ideas it fought. Radical transparency and free speech above everything. Given that it was so important to have free speech, what happened?
Did it get taken down?
No, didn't get taken down. But what kind of people flocked to Minds?
Lunatics?
Lunatics is a very pejorative term.
People like neo-Nazis who get chased off other mainstream
Of course!
social media platforms.
People who can't express their views in polite society thought, here is a forum for me to express my views. I want all Jewish people to be murdered. Here is a place that you can express that view. Because we have a radical sort of consistency about free speech here. Within days, Minds became a cesspit of far-right bullshit. And of course, any decent, like-minded person left very, very quickly and left it to stew in the swamp that it became. Unfortunately, in order to attract users, alternative social media will often forego a lot of the community guidelines that actual social, the big social media companies operate, and that leaves the door open to radicalism. And radicalism is not a very comfortable place for the vast majority of people to sit in. Therefore, they tend to fall away. Gab is a direct example of this. A Twitter alternative started around about 2018. Kind of versions of it existed a little bit before that. If you signed up for Gab, okay, don't, is my first piece of advice. Do not sign up for Gab, all right? But if you did sign up, you'd notice that it looks exactly like Twitter. I mean, the structure of it and how it looks is identical. So they basically just nicked Twitter.
It's Twitter for people who aren't allowed on Twitter.
Again, yeah. Gab was entirely set up to allow people who had been banned from Twitter to use a Twitter alternative. It marketed itself as a safe haven for neo-Nazis. In the aftermath of Donald Trump's victory in the 2016 American election, and an overwhelming visibility of far-right ideas being expressed on social networks, which were, for all their flaws and for how slow this can be, overall those social networks did a fairly good job of rooting a lot of those people out. It wasn't perfect, and they weren't brilliant at doing it, but they did the job eventually. Gab set up and literally called itself an echo chamber for right-wing content dissemination. It drew on the ideas that Pariza had as a positive. It said, you don't like the stuff you see on Twitter by all these lefties and centrists? Come here and you won't have to see it. All we're going to talk about is genocide. You like that? We are going to talk about white supremacy. You like that? This is the place for you.
It's not a joke. It is actually.
Nearly 500,000 people joined this network.
I mean, even the logo's a dog whistle to the.
Yeah, of course it is. It's Pepe, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even clock that.
Richard Spencer.
It's a dog whistle.
Most of you won't know who Richard Spencer is, but there's a very famous clip of Richard Spencer on the day of Trump's inauguration in 2017. Richard Spencer is a far-right, white supremacist rabble-rouser in the United States, and it's a great clip because he's being interviewed on a street corner in Washington, D.C., just down from the inauguration site, and somebody walks up behind him and smashes him in the head and literally knocks him out. It's fucking brilliant. It's one of my favourite clips of all time. Bloke just walks up behind him and just absolutely hammers him as well. He went flying. It was brilliant. Alex Jones, you're familiar with who Alex Jones is? Yeah. Alex Jones, famously now bankrupt, even though he's worth about $105 million. And the guy behind InfoWars, who has now been shut down, unfortunately, for the blatant lies they told about the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012. So they were the most followed users on Gab. You can see from here, Jones and Spencer have both been banned by every other social network, basically. Gab was their home. You can see how alternatives to social media haven't been great at this point. The Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in October 2018, the perpetrator was a Gab user that had a verified account who used his account to spread anti-Semitic abuse prior to the synagogue shooting. Although this has never really been corroborated by the FBI, there was the implication that he was using the private messaging facility of Gab to contact people about the attack beforehand, which in theory, this is a very difficult thing to pin on these people. In theory, I guess there was a way to prevent that from happening, although whether those people have the technical sophistication to do that is another question altogether. I would be very sceptical that you could say it was the fault of the owners of Gab that they didn't pick up that this man was going to do that. I don't think that's a fair trial to make. What they certainly did allow was this guy to spread this kind of ideology, to link with other people, to pick up ideas about what he should do to execute his plans and to execute his ideology. There's no doubt about that. Gab, in fairness, handed over all the information immediately as soon as the FBI did it. They didn't put their hands up about, this is about privacy and about people's right to free speech. And like, no, we don't agree with what happened here. You can have all this information. But in light of that, no hosting company would touch them with a barge pole. They basically went dark within hours. They shopped around, tried to find someone else. Now they did get back online 2 days later, but it was in a radically different form, and they lost the publicity around this meant they lost loads and loads of users. So, what do we know? Alternative social media, yes, it's decentralized, advertising free, no data sold, but it's the hinging of free speech. The idea that social networks won't let you operate in a free speech environment, and we will, produces this kind of stuff. Does anyone know where this picture's taken from?
Charlottesville.
Yeah, Charlottesville 2016. The use has basically been associated with marginal groups in society, and what I mean by marginal here is not marginal in terms of race. I don't mean marginal in terms of, sexuality. I mean marginal in terms of these people are fucking psychos. That's what I mean by marginal. In trying to avoid filter bubbles, all these things did was create other echo chambers which were even fucking worse than the ones that existed in the first place. Now, there are other models for social media out there. For example, some of the social media networks, some of the biggest in the world, and indeed, in terms of absolute user numbers, the biggest in the world is WeChat. A mobile instant messaging application, a little chat app, and it's become a technology platform on its own where basically every function of everyday life can be executed through having a WeChat account. You can buy your groceries, pay for your parking, I'm not even going to go on. Anything that you can think of, you can do it through WeChat.
Find a plumber.
Find anything, do anything. You don't have to leave WeChat to get things done. What is the problem? Does anyone know what the problem with WeChat is as an alternative to social networks? An alternative way of social networks happening. I haven't actually told you this bit of WeChat yet, but can anyone tell me what do they think the problem might be?
Targeting advertising?
No different to any social network we use, really.
Isn't it a sort of... Isn't it something to do with mass surveillance? If I remember correctly, WeChat is like... Worse. Yeah.
WeChat isn't mass surveillance. WeChat is state surveillance. WeChat doesn't function as an independent social network. It is a functionary of the Chinese Communist Party. This is a mechanism for maintaining state surveillance. If you would say Tiananmen Square 1989 on WeChat, you'd get arrested within an hour. You may not know what I'm referring to here. You can look it up if you wish.
Some protest?
A very, very famous protest. Yeah, a very famous pro-democracy protest in the centre of Beijing in 1989, which was ended by the Chinese Communist Party rolling tanks over the protesters in front of the world's media. I remember watching it happen. Since 1989, the Chinese Communist Party has repressed all information about that event in China. If you search for it, you'll find nothing in China, but you will be picked up by the authorities for even searching for it. You won't actually find any information about it. This is how the Great Firewall in China works. It locks down dissident information in its entirety. So you can never find out about the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. But if you even went looking for it, they'll know. The reason why they'll know is because of the type of control that is exercised over networks like this. Everything is linked into the state. It is an alternative. I don't think it's the alternative we want. The idea that everything is controlled by the state itself, and we have no choice in that. So, even more integrated into surveillance than Western social networks, intricately linked to the function of the state, even when used outside the Great Firewall. We will have, there's many millions of people in the UK, well, millions, thousands of people in the UK who use WeChat on a daily basis. That's not a problem, they can do that, it's fine. You know, for people who are part of the Chinese diaspora, I'd say that's a really important function of staying in touch with home and staying in touch with their culture. I think that's a very important thing. All of that data is harvested by the Chinese Communist Party. Doesn't matter where in the world you use WeChat, you will be linked into the Chinese state surveillance system. They will be taking that information. Think about that next time somebody says they're going to send a message about you on WeChat. You could just become part of the Chinese state surveillance system too. You might not be comfortable with that. So, there is alternatives. But being outside the monopolies is hard. It's hard to make it a go of it, and it's hard to stop the lunatics. And perhaps the only way you can do it is by becoming a functionary of the state. And we don't want that either. We really don't. Not in a liberal democracy, at least. So is there an alternative to the social media we have? I don't think so. Probably not. Sorry, that sucks. So yeah, have a lovely Easter.
Scared me 2 hours ago.
I thought you were scared. He's just.
I just don't want to download any more apps ever.
Yeah. if you've got something out of this module, that's it. No question. With the distance depending on does
I suddenly don't want to go.
so I wanted to do it.
I'll charge my Switch and I'll have a smoke on Mario Kart.
Video games or more than likely on me. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, social media really is not, to be fair, because there's a lot of social media projects I can't do. So, Reese does,
Oh, is that the one with the vintage shit?
gaming,
They have the skate stuff.
more than likely be, unless it's about cinematic aspects, then maybe one of those films.
Well, I mean, I did literally a video project and I kind of realised that actually I didn't enjoy it a lot. So, the dissertation on sort of social media streaming companies and stuff.
You guys go pub
Really
as well.
interesting. I'd like to work on that.
Cheeky vibe.
Probably would be me.
I was going to say,
You
wait.
can specify me.
Oh.
That's your desire. But that's not something you have to worry about until like late October.
Yeah.
And by then you might have got a better idea of a different object.
Oh, let me. Alright,
Bit late.
Bit
At
late.
least, do you
Do we have to sign up on it?
too late. I never signed up. Signed in.
I leave it and then I get emails off the uni being like, you need to come to class. And I'm like,